Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is TV7's Powers in Play. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on strategic power competition. What does it mean for the Middle East? Of course, since the significant meeting that occurred back in 19th of March 2021 between the then U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Chinese foreign counselor, as they call it, Wang Yi, in the state of Alaska. They discussed about the variables that had to do with the disagreements between the two superpowers, namely the United States and China. And since then, the situation has only escalated. Complexities have emerged across the globe with far-reaching ramifications also to the Middle East, which ultimately also have direct implications for the state of Israel. To deliberate those implications, joining me here include Dr. Oren Lerman, formerly a Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, today a Vice President of the Jerusalem for Strategy and Security in Jerusalem, of course, and lecturer at Shalem College. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, the President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, formerly the Director General of the Ministry for Strategic Affairs and the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division. On my right, Ambassador Danya Yalon, formerly the Israeli ambassador to the United States, as well as a Deputy Foreign Minister. And last but not least, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. And today, I'd like to start with you, Mr. Oren. Today from the hot seat, I'd like to ask you to broaden the complexities from a strategic power competition perspective, since Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, they all play a part in the grand strategy of both the United States and China. How do you see this mapping out?
So competition is just another word for conflict, but without the guns roaring yet. And obviously, the main rival, the pacing rival adversary, as the Americans call it, is China. The Chinese have several years ago decided that 2027, 2 years from now, could be the crucial time in their ambition to reincorporate Taiwan, the former Formosa, into the mainland China system. And the Americans have been preparing for a real conflict, not just in competition, in the Pacific and beyond. There is also, of course, the Russian angle, whether Russia would be cooperating with China against the United States or left in the stands to watch the two take potshots at each other, or perhaps even, it doesn't seem realistic right now, but perhaps even maybe after Putin get closer to Washington and more remote from Beijing. Now, as for the Middle East, this is not the main arena for superpower or great power competition right now, but each side wants to score points in the Levant, in the Mediterranean, in the Arabian Peninsula, and in the Red Sea or the Horn of Africa, where the Chinese are trying to put their flag and their maritime assets. Right now, as we are looking back at President Trump's visit to the Middle East, it seems that the United States is paramount, but there is flexibility and fluidity in world events, so we shouldn't rush to judgment.
And yet, when we're talking about the conflict that has been raging now for 2 years, it's quite easy to separate at least two actors within this complexity, namely Israel, affiliated or backed by the United States and supported, and the Iranians, fully backed by the Chinese, supported by them. Granted, we do see that there were complexities in that relationship, but nonetheless, Dr. Lehrman, is that a fair characterization? With the other actors, of course, despite having clear treaty affiliations, not necessarily fully fledged to one side or another.
Well, I think treaty relations are less significant. Of course, Israel is very, very close to the United States, and without a treaty, any formal treaty. And countries with a formal treaty with the United States, I'm thinking of Spain in Europe as an example, are very, very far from the American position. So it's not a question necessarily of formal, but rather of practical alignments, if not alliances. And here, I think there is some validity to the term which I've come across again and again recently, the Crink. That's short for China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. As distinct from the BRICS, which was basically just a cry of protest against the economic dominance of the North, the G7, the Crink have actually acted as an alignment of forces in order to change the global balance. We saw the Chinese lending support, at least material and political support for the Russians, the Iranians supplying them with drones, North Korean troops going to fight in the battlefield in Ukraine. So it did look increasingly like a bizarre collection, of course, of one is an extremely orthodox Islamist regime. The North Koreans are in a category of their own. The Chinese are communist by name and capitalist by practice, and Russia has gone Pravoslav under Putin. But all of them had one aspect clearly in common, which is deep, abiding hate of the United States and its position in world affairs. Now, Israel has been able, through its actions, particularly from the summer of 24 onwards, to take Iran down a few pegs without Russia or China, or North Korea for that matter, being able to help the Iranians regain their position, at least not until now. And I think that we've done damage to the Crink as an alignment, and help the United States reestablish its predominance. And the Gaza game, which Trump has come to lead, is just an expression of a larger shift in balances in the region itself. And as for China, I don't know what lessons they are drawing. You mentioned 27. I don't know what lessons they are drawing from the Russian misadventure in Ukraine. The most important student of the Russian failure to bring Zelensky to his knees is Xi Jinping.
Indeed. Well, of course, it's quite interesting to see that the inability to bring about Chinese-Russian support to the Iranians for fear of various causality or consequences is now being also undertaken by the Russians against the Europeans, where they are, of course, breaching European sovereignty time and again by various aircraft, be they unmanned aerial systems or the manned systems. And one of the interpretations of those activities was made in Europe that Putin was trying to show the world that Article 4 or Article 5 are mute, they're null and void, and therefore NATO alliance is not as significant as the West claims. This, of course, has not yet managed to materialize, but nonetheless, when we're looking on a regional perspective, the diplomatic tool the United States is utilizing in order to ensure alignment by various regional actors, to include Turkey, to include even Israel, as well as the Egyptians, is quite vigorous. And it seems like the Americans are not willing to play games when it comes to any infiltration, so to speak, of the Chinese after Beijing managed to sign the Road and Belt Initiative with pretty much all countries or most countries throughout the region.
Yes, Jonathan, what a distance we have covered since before Trump was elected or since he was sworn in until now. If you recall, and we have also, I think, discussed it here numerous times, that Trump, certainly J.D. Vance and other people at the MAGA are quite isolationist. And the fear was that Trump, being cynical as he is, or looking at everything through maybe his own, not just political eyes, but also economic eyes, would prefer different interests which may not just align with the United States allies, namely Ukraine and Taiwan. But I think we see now, especially after the American active involvement in Iran, that Trump is willing to go the extra mile in order to A, support allies, and B, to exert American dominance.
Which shows that the president himself is not an isolationist.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And yes, and certainly he is the one who's calling the shots, even though there are some powerful positions or people in his administrations like J.D. Vance and a few others. But yes, he's calling the shots. He also, I think, was the first sign that he was not going to go the isolationist way, was appointing Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State, because he is a very good initiator and also somebody who can close or help Trump's with his visions. I think that Trump also, and what we see here, that, and I think this is maybe goes throughout history, the lesson is that not everything is planned. Certainly, with so many moving parts, nobody can plan ahead. So a lot of things are left to just happenstance, circumstances, sometimes even luck, and seizing opportunities. And Trump knew how to seize the opportunities in Iran. He was not quite keen to start, but I think he really leveraged on Israel's great technological intelligence, operational success, and so he wanted a part of it, and quite successfully. This is a very, very clear sign to China and Russia to be more aware of what they might do to upset the United States. The last thing I want to say before, and it goes across the geopolitical lines, is technology. There is, when we talk about China and the United States, there is a major arms race or technology race, especially on AI and quantum computing. And now I understand that Trump is going to put much more money to make sure that the United States is reaching a real, I would say, gap. So they would really be more advanced and put some facts on the ground and keeping pretty much China at bay.
General Kuperwasser, the military compositions here do reflect to a certain degree, however, the strategic power competition that is currently raging between the United States and China. We do see, of course, all the chatter between President Trump and President Xi with regard to the REE, the rare earth elements or rare earth minerals, which is a key aspect to this competition. But nonetheless, past mistakes are acknowledged, to include a task force 151 that was established to combat piracy, where the United States, under the Bush administration at the time, sought to include as many as possible nations, to include the Chinese, which ultimately resulted in the expansion of China by the establishment of a naval base in Djibouti. Now we're seeing a lot more caution when we're talking about the various activities in the field throughout this region. How do you see this reflected in also the broadening of the Abraham Accords and the various challenges that may be presented in countries that may view themselves as potentially aligned with the Chinese camp as well?
Well, I would say the following. First of all, militarily speaking, what was proved in the last 2 years was again the supremacy of the Western, especially American, capabilities vis-a-vis the competition from Chinese or Russian equipment. That was proved to such an extent that anybody who has a clear view of the situation would prefer to be friends with the United States than be friends with Russia or China. Look at the Iranians and what situations they found themselves in because of that. And this has brought about a real shift in this big conflict between the powers, the great powers, because it's clear that the United States, even though maybe it's less looking for getting involved in anything, if it finds itself involved, it has capabilities that nobody can match. That is something that everybody has to take into consideration. Secondly, based on that, there are all kinds of aspirations of the Americans that we tend to forget from time to time, but I think they still have in their minds. Greenland, things like that, are things still that they would like to see happening because of the RE. That's something that they keep in mind. And what we are witnessing right now is how this new situation is being translated into a new reality in the Middle East. Now, it's not decided yet. You see the Chinese, for example, and to some extent the Russians saying we are going to continue cooperating economically and maybe also militarily and technologically with the Iranians in spite of the snapback of the sanctions and in spite of whatever happened because they don't have a replacement. That's what they have. But of course, they're doing that from a much weaker point. And the success of the Americans in bringing together all the leaders of the West and the leaders of the major Muslim countries, including the Arab ones, to support the peace plan, so-called, for Gaza and for beyond Gaza, may convince more countries, Muslim countries that were sitting on the fence, undecided, to choose the United States. Look at Pakistan, for example. It's definitely Indonesia. They are moving slowly, surely, cautiously, but they are doing all of that, moving to the side of the United States, and this is a major beginning of a shift that we have to take into account. That's what I was looking at the recent developments, and the potential for Israel in that is immense because Israel was the tool with which the supremacy of the Western weaponry was manifested. And Israel is the one that's going to benefit most of that because if we are going to see this movement towards the American base, it is going to be paralleled by better relations with Israel. That's what we expect to see happening, and I think this is the way for President Trump to convince Israel to accept that the war in Gaza is over. I'll give you some goodies in the relations with Muslim countries, so you should not need to bring Hamas to its knees.
With that being said, of course, the complexities that some of those countries are dealing with, particularly Pakistan, which of course relies heavily on Chinese military equipment, among others, raises questions as to what type of transition it needs to undertake in order to make that leap at the end. But nonetheless, let's go down into the smaller resolutions of regional power competition as derived from strategic power competition. Mr. Oren, naturally, the big loser over the course of the past 2 years is the Islamic Republic of Iran, but that vacuum that emerged following its defeat and consecutive defeats, if I may, with regard also to its regional proxies, ultimately brought a new power to exploit this situation, namely Turkey. It is expanding itself in all kinds of locations. It sees, of course, Africa since the declaration by the then Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu in 2012 that Turkey wants to see itself throughout the African continent by 2035 to a new dimension, so to speak. And this is causing friction between two American allies, namely Ankara and Jerusalem.
So the common denominator between Erdogan and Trump, the personality factor, is that they are very ambitious to put themselves, each of them separately, but maybe cooperatively, in a historical context. There was a very interesting vignette, a short video clip which Trump released, in which he's sitting in a golf cart with his granddaughter. And his granddaughter is asking her grandfather, did you have any dreams which were not fulfilled? And he said, no, my dream was to become president, and I became president. And then she presses him, and he says, well, I still have one dream, to be a great president. So the notion of greatness, because Trump is very transparent in his personal ambition, he's not conniving, he may be bluffing.
Is there a president who is not?
No, if you look at a Nixon or a Clinton, there are people who are not transparent. But for Trump, he's not shy, to say the least. And one has to try and analyze what is the way he's going to translate his quest for greatness vis-a-vis Erdogan, who also wants to become the new Ataturk. It is possible to find a dividing line between Turkey and Israel in Syria, because Syria is the main event from Erdogan's point of view. From Israel's point of view, it is a security relationship plus the Druze community in Sweden. So a compromise can be found based on Trump's and Erdogan's quest for personal greatness.
Well, of course, one of the things that is quite apparent in Turkey is the fact that they are in a crossroads. One, that President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's term is about to expire, with a demand for reform in the constitution to be able to lengthen that term, requiring the Kurdish parties to support him to bring about such a reform, which is then translated into the various complexities in northern Syria. But nonetheless, when we are looking at the Turkish challenge vis-a-vis America, since they had friction for a very long time, it is a friction that ultimately subsided due to the fact that strategic power competition played a role in there. And Dr. Lerman, we hear various actors within the national government coalition, led by the AKP, specifically also the Nationalist Party, which is the second largest, coming out and saying that we should consider potentially shifting towards the Chinese. Now, they know that this will create certain reactions in Washington, which they're hoping will grant them more leverage to operate within the boundaries that are established by the current administration.
That, I think, is sometimes you hear this also from foolish Israelis who play with the idea, we could play with the Chinese. No, there is no Chinese option as of yet. Their presence in the region is much less impressive than one would have expected, given the prominence that he gave to the Belt and Road BRI in his day. Much less of this has been realized than one would have expected. And interestingly, since Pakistan was mentioned here, the fact that they have now cast their lot with the Americans in certain ways, nominated unsuccessfully Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize and so on, gave him credit for ending the short inflammation of conflict with India, is indicative of what the Turks must also take into account. What is the real balance of power here? There is a cost, by the way. We should mention this. This courtship of Pakistan, as well as some trade issues, have wreaked havoc on the American-Indian relationship. And that could be a major factor in favor of the Chinese, because if the Quad is seriously weakened, Japan, Australia, India, and United States, the balance in East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific shifts in favor of the Chinese. But closer to home, I think their impact has been rather underwhelming. The Saudis played their game, went with them to a kind of Beijing wedding ceremony with the Iranians, of which nothing is left by now. I would mention in this context the recent revelations about the CENTCOM documents about close Israeli-Arab cooperation. The United States still has tools that nobody else has in the region. Israel is part of that array. And I think the appetite in Ankara for actually putting all of this to a test is rather limited.
Ambassador Ayalon, with that being said, the Russians are still eyeing the region. Mr. Owen mentioned earlier that they're not as significant as they may have been prior to the Seventh Front War that Israel has engaged in, but nonetheless, they are not looking to disengage from the ports of Latakia and Tartus in Syria anytime soon. They have shifted somewhat to Libya, where they are in support of the Haftar government, which yet again puts them in conflict with Turkey, which receives backing from the United States in this context in the North African country. And yet it also reflects badly on Egypt, which is, let's not forget, a very significant partner in the American scheme of things, brought about by Kissinger back in the 70s, something that, of course, we don't want to see reversed anytime soon.
Right, and I don't think that there is any risk now for American dominance, especially in the Middle East. And Russia has lost a lot of ground. First of all, because of the failed operational war in the Ukraine, and then also the new shift, the geopolitical shift here, where its two main allies have suffered badly, Iran and Syria more so. Syria is no longer an ally of Russia, and we see al-Julani or Mr. Ashara, which is quite opposed to Russia because of its historical support of its arch or its nemesis, Assad, to the extent that now he's demanding Russia to extradite Assad for a trial in Damascus. Will be interesting to see whether Putin will acquiesce to that. I'm not sure, but again, this will be a point of friction which will not allow Russia to really dig in, whether it's in Tartus or Latakia. Yes, they still will have some forces there, but I think it's namely a symbolic one. It's not a force that can make a difference in terms of strategic threat to any of American allies. Russia also suffered more than symbolically, and it's almost like a trade-off. Just as the American prominence in the region goes up, especially with what we've seen in Sharm el-Sheikh, the peace conference presided by both Trump and Egypt, which is not a small feat. This will keep Egypt in the American side. But also Putin summoned 22 Arab countries, the Arab League, to Moscow, actually in this very time, and they all reneged because they have a better chance with the United States. So I think for the foreseeable future, Jonathan, I think we will see Russia pretty much withdrawing to its own region, seeing what will happen in the Ukraine. NATO is actually becoming stronger with the budget, defense budget going up, and I think now Trump and NATO also have come to terms. So this will be a very strong front against Russia, which also will reflect on Turkey, because Turkey, when they see the United States and NATO getting stronger, they do not have much choice but to stick there and not go to China, certainly not to Russia.
May I briefly respond to the extradition issue
Very briefly.
of Bashar Assad? Great powers never extradite former rulers to the countries, to the new regimes, because this will, of course, signal to all of the other allies that they cannot rely on Moscow. And there is this famous film, Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears. It's not as if Putin has become sentimental in his view of Bashar Assad, but strategically it's a no-no.
Except that this may be a hook or a leverage or a pretext for
I'm not
Syria
sure.
not to go towards Russia.
I'm not sure for other reasons. Right now, Syria owes Russia billions of dollars over years of grain imports that have been monumental in sustaining this country. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Damascus regime currently needs to import more than 2.15 billion tons of wheat just to sustain during the remainder of 25 and 26 alone, due to a drought of really biblical proportions, something that we do need to take into account. And Syria, including by the latest statements by the Ashara president or interim president, whatever you want to call him these days, he has started to make various statements and send delegates to Moscow to try and resolve this issue, since Damascus is still reliant on Russia, irrespective of other complexities at hand. And therefore, when we're looking at this type of challenge for countries that were in one camp and turned to another camp, General Kuperwasser, ultimately, we know that the Iranians, if we're talking about infrastructure throughout the region, the Russians, their own infrastructure throughout the region, they're just looking for the opportunity to return into their spheres of influence, and they're waiting, obviously, for the mistakes of the other to be made that will ultimately translate into strategic successes. Israel, the United States, and others in the Western-backed camp or Western-aligned camp are looking to avoid such mistakes, but it seems like they are going to happen at some point. As history dictates, these types of mistakes are inevitable.
Not inevitable, but they're made by human beings. It's, somebody does them. But I think that the trend is more important than the here and there opportunities that might emerge along the trend. And the trend is that the United States is gaining power. Trump is only in his first year in office. He has 3.5 years ahead of him. It's enough time to make a difference. And he has proven his ability to build coalitions that are beyond what is expected. And I believe that the trend is going to continue. And instead of making a mistake, we can make the right things here and there, occasionally, and put more pressure on Iran. Look, it was not in the cards for a long time that the Europeans will snap back the sanctions. But they did. And the Iranians are in a very bad shape. Would it eventually bring about the collapse of the Iranian regime?
Inshallah.
Inshallah. We all say inshallah, but it's something that the Iranians have to take very seriously. And if it's not enough that Israel and the United States and the West is working against them, even the weather is against them. They don't have water. So it's, they're in a very bad shape, and they understand it. What I worry about is that those who might make a mistake are not necessarily Israel, but are the Iranians. Under this kind of pressure, with the support of China and Russia, or alleged support of China and Russia, they might think that the way to break away from this corner is to escalate. And they spread threats all over the place. So maybe this is what they're going to do. And if they are going to make this mistake, then they are going to give Israel and the United States an excuse to finish the job against them. It's a very delicate situation that the Iranians are facing. And look, everybody around is moving in the direction of the United States. The situation became so dire that they were invited to participate in the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's, they had to refuse to come. It's almost entering the American area of dominance. It's, the situation is so critical for the Iranians. And I think that Israel's position is very peculiar because on the one hand, we want to finish the job in Gaza. We understand the importance, but at the same time, all kinds of new opportunities appear. And you have to gauge very well whether to finish the job and lose the opportunities or grab the opportunities and make the best out of them. We should have to see how much President Trump can offer to Israel in order to convince it to move forward.
Well, many practitioners, leaders, and generals who I've had the opportunity to speak with in Europe particularly, but also in broader sense, they all say the best for Israel right now is to see how to capitalize on the tactical successes and translate it into a strategic victory. That is something that obviously is complex by itself, but nonetheless, we also need to recognize the fact that many countries in the region who view a fall of the Ayatollah regime as a success for Israel do also look at this necessarily as something that they would like to avert. They'd like to see a weak Ayatollah regime, but not a fallen one, because they do see that as a new horizon for Israel to gain more leverage in a very complex region. But we are drawing near to the end of today's Powers in Play. As such, I'd like each of you to give us a brief analysis. Where are we heading from here? Each of you gets roughly 1 minute. Try not to jump beyond that. Ambassador Ayalon, we'll start with you.
So I think I will be very optimistic. I believe that what we have seen in Gaza, in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and certainly in Iran, even with the Houthis, that Israel was the only daring force there, even the United States withdrew, is really lending itself to a new Middle East. And Gaza aside, which of course is something that we will have to take care of, but I think all the conditions are ripe for Israel. Hamas is losing also in the diplomatic way. We have denied them their only card, which is the hostages. And in the agreement or in the framework of the 20 points of Trump, no reconstruction will start without the dismantling. So we have all the cards. And as General Kuperwasser alluded to, I think all eyes are to Riyadh, whereby we can really move forward to a new Middle East peace. Of course, Israel will have to pay here with Palestinian currency.
Dr. Lilman?
Well, I'm looking a bit further down the road, and on the assumption that real change can come from the Gaza situation and the relationship between Israel and some of the Gulf players, Saudi Arabia above all, not necessarily in full normalization, ambassadors, but let's say economic relationship. This would bring India back into the game because the alternative to the BRI is the IMEEC. And that has been launched with American support. And that could be a major economic and strategic transformative agency looking down the road.
IMAC. General.
I really think that we look at the level of the great power competition. That's one level. We discussed it. I don't have anything to add on that. But there is at the same time a lower level of regional power competition. And I think what we have to look very carefully about is that Turkey, with Qatar, trying to impose their will over Syria, are going to try to use this new situation and success in proving their weight and importance in the context of the Gaza deal in order to gain power on the expense of Israel in the heart of the Middle East. And this is something that we have to follow very closely.
Which are the other actors? The GCC?
The GCC, the moderates,
Qatar.
that those who oppose the Muslim Brotherhood, and together with Israel are going to be the other power that's going to compete for regional dominance against these Muslim Brotherhood supporters.
Which is one side of the equation. Of course, the Iranian aspect is another, together with the Houthis and their proxies in other countries. Mr. Oren?
Israel is being incorporated into the Middle East, into the Arab and Muslim Middle East, which is a major event. Perhaps this is at least the verge of the third major event following the peace between Israel and Egypt in the late 70s, and then in the first Gulf War between the United States and Saddam Hussein, with Israel being passively part of the alliance. If President Trump's vision is implemented, Israel can gain a lot because Saudi Arabia, even more than Egypt and Syria, was the main proponent of the 1973 war and then the oil embargo. And if it now goes under MBS to the moderate side, it's a major shift.
As the last city that the Saudis have built, Neom, Neo Mustaqbal, play on words, a new future, using the Old Greek and the Arabic. We'll end with that, with hopes for, of course, peace and hopefully also a secure future for all nations in this region. Dr. Eran Lerman, General Yossi Kuperwasser, Ambassador Daniel Ayalon, and Mr. Oren, thank you all for all of your valuable insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.